last Easter, we took a survey in our church and we gave a list of things for people to choose from. What is your number one question? What is the thing you'd like to hear us talk about the most in the coming year? And hands down, number one was, what's God's will for my life, or what's God's purpose for my life?
Wow.
Welcome to the Good Life Podcast, where we talk about the search for significance, the pursuit of purposes, and the challenges of our culture today. I'm your host, Carl Nichols, and I'm here with Pastor Daniel Foster, and we're honored that you would join us on this journey toward finding the good life. It's a new year, and our last episode, we talked about kind of 3 things to focus on for 2023. I know I've heard a lot of feedback from that already, specifically related to saying no more often.
Yes.
And I think that's going to change some people's lives this year. I don't know, from your perspective, we've both talked about this, shared about this. That was my favorite episode.
Oh, I said the same thing. A few people came to me and said, I love that episode. It was incredible. Great insight. It's like, I agree. I might be biased, but I agree. It's my favorite episode to date. And so practical, and some steps that I know that changed my life and hopefully, change someone else's.
I think that's important because as we go into seasons, there are certain things we talk about that hit you in the right season. I know I'm a sports fan. I know we're in the middle of football season, coming into football season, and playoffs are around the corner. And I played baseball growing up, and I could smell the grass when it was cut. And you're like, oh, this season's rolling around.
Hype.
Well, we're in a new season in January of 2023 where everybody's kind of looking at, okay, new beginnings, purpose, organization, priorities, all of those types of things for their own life. And I think as we jump into our conversation today and in the coming weeks, I think if we can just remember and go back to that episode, it'll change our lives this year. Yep. And like you said, it's not making resolutions. It's not some, I got 2 messages even yesterday saying, thank you for that particular podcast. I had the hardest time saying no. I'm a people pleaser. Yep. It was so, like you said, so practical. And so today I want to pick up on the heels of a message that I preached the first Sunday back in January here at Relevant Church about purpose. We're in the series called Life's Toughest Questions, and over the next few podcasts, we're going to be unpacking this idea of purpose. And the first question that we began talking about was, what's my purpose? What am I here for? Why do I even exist?
Huge question. Everybody's wondering that.
And really, when you can Google like life's toughest questions, and there's like, all these different things, but like 4 or 5 of them be like, why am I here? What's my purpose? What am I called to do? And the funny thing about it is, last Easter, we took a survey in our church and we gave a list of things for people to choose from. What is your number one question? What is the thing you'd like to hear us talk about the most in the coming year? And hands down, number one was, what's God's will for my life, or what's God's purpose for my life?
Wow.
And so we're going to take in this series, after answering the question, we'll review here what we talked about in the kickoff of the series here in a moment, but we're going to take the next 3 or 4 podcasts and really unpack this idea of God's purpose, God's plan, God's will. Those words can kind of be used interchangeably. So let's take a minute and just review a little bit about what we talked about on Sunday. We talked about this quote by Miles Monroe where he said this. He said, "The greatest tragedy in life is not death, but life without a purpose."
Yeah.
And
that's so, and if you think about that, you spend all your time here on earth and never find your purpose. You just going through the motions. That's just a profound thought.
What's crazy about Dr. Miles Monroe, he was a very well-known pastor in the Bahamas. And he actually died in a plane crash heading to preach the gospel. And to hear a man say this and then watch him die in the middle of fulfilling his purpose is pretty powerful. There's a man who are friends with us here whose brother was in that plane with him.
Really?
And he was a very well-known, a very well-respected man. And I just think, here's a man who did pursue his purpose to change the islands and to make a difference there. And the tragedy, he would say now on the other side of eternity, is not that he died. I think he would say, the tragedy would have been if I had not fulfilled my purpose. Yep. And so as we wrestle with these conversations, let me give you a couple takeaways from this past week so we can jump into just 3 conversations that I want us to kick off with, or 3 questions. We talked about David and how David was going to be the king of the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, God's people, serving God's people, but he started out as a shepherd boy. He wasn't pursuing a platform. He wasn't pursuing followers. He wasn't trying to build a name for himself. He was doing what he was called to do. in that moment. And it says in Acts chapter 13, referring back to David, though, he later became the king of the nation of Israel, the most well-known king, the most popular king, like their chosen king, because he would kill Goliath, then he'd become king. I mean, it was a pretty
He's a decent guy.
Yeah, just a decent guy. So he says this in Acts 13, referring back to David. It says, now when David had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep and was buried with his ancestors, and his body decayed. It's just that one statement, when David had served God's purpose in his own generation. So he's in a different generation, different time, different season, but he served God's purpose, which ultimately, here's the two things we said, and I'm curious to get your feedback on either one of these two things. You said if you don't know the purpose of the thing, you'll likely abuse that thing. And so we've gone through life abusing our marriages, abusing our spouse, abusing ourselves, abusing our kids. I don't mean that in a literal sense. I just mean like taking advantage or not living up to the expectations that maybe we have for life because we don't even know why we exist or what our marriage exists for. And so if you don't know the purpose of something, you'll abuse that. And so many people are going through life not knowing their purpose, and they're abusing their own life. Mm-hmm. They're not even making the most of their own life. They're using it for all the wrong reasons. So two things we said Sunday as a backdrop. If you don't find, first of all, you don't find your purpose, you serve God's purpose.
Yeah.
We're trying to find our purpose. The center of that is me. Mm-hmm. Me. And then the second thing we said is, if you want to serve God's purpose, start serving God's people. And that's what David did. He wasn't trying to find his purpose. Mm-hmm. He was serving God's purpose. Serving God's purpose meant serving God's people. He's the most well-known king of the nation of God, of Israel, God's people, in history. And so for me, it just made me realize every single day I have the opportunity, and we'll talk about this here in a minute, and this is kind of the focus of our podcast today. Every single day, I have an opportunity to serve God's purpose, and in doing so, I'm fulfilling my purpose.
Yes. Yep. I know, I heard a while back, someone said, if you're trying to find out your purpose, my question to you is not what's your purpose, but who are you serving? And that's where I discovered my purpose, is serving. I started way back. My stepmom asked me to help out at kids camp one summer. I'm like, no, it's my summer off. I'm not going to do that. She's like, come on, they need some help. I'm like, no, I don't think so. And then through some begging, I'm like, okay, sure, fine. How much are they going to pay me? And she's like, it's volunteer. I'm like, well, then absolutely not. I'm not going to work at this camp. I went to the camp, and the week I served was underprivileged camp for kids who were in foster home, and so it's all scholarship. And my cabin alone, we had 17 5- and 6-year-olds.
Oh my gosh!
It was me and one other counselor. If I hadn't been there, he would have been by himself. And it was that first night. I mean, I broke up a fight in the bathroom. 2 of these kids punched out another kid's tooth. It was just chaos. And at the end of the week, when most normal people would be like, all right, hope I helped. I'll see you never. I was like, hey, do y'all need help next week?
Wow.
And that week kicked off the next 5 summers of my life.
Wow.
And in fact, I was so young serving. I was 14, and they let me serve youth week. I couldn't tell anyone my age because we had campers older than I was. And it was at that camp where I was like, I felt God's call. Like, this is what you're going to do. You're going to impact the next generation. You're going to lead the next generation. You're going to teach the next generation.
Wow.
And so it was at that camp. It's in a moment of serving where I found my purpose in the midst of doing God's purpose.
Yeah, and I think, we talk about that a lot, joy in serving.
Yes.
And because there's joy when you know your purpose. I don't think people understand the correlation between serving God's people, correlating to knowing your purpose. And there's contentment and joy when you find that.
And I don't think it's coincidence that week was called Camp Joy. It was Camp Joy because it was,
we
had every year we had Camp Joy weekend. It was for always the underprivileged or the foster kids. And
wow.
we scholarshiped them to come for the whole week.
Wow. And so now you fast forward 20 years later, and here you are. That's crazy. So here's the thing about this podcast too. I said in the message, like, don't try to build a platform for yourself. Like, we're not called to build a platform, to seek power, to seek a position. You're called to serve people. And that's really what this podcast is for. We're not out here trying to, look, if we have 1 million subscribers one day, great. It means we're making an impact in people's lives. But the goal is not to have ticks on a sheet or double taps on a lot. It's to say we are providing we're not trying to make a splash. We're not trying to, talk about hot topics that just throw people off to get followed. Like, we want to help you and serve you by getting information and ideas and content
serves you and helps you take steps towards the person God's created you to be.
Yeah, and of course we want you to share this. We want you to like it. We want you to follow. We want you to give a review. All of those things, but we want you to do that because we believe in the content, not because we're trying to, fulfill some kind of desire or need in our life. There's many other things we could be doing other than trying to film these things and get the content out. There's plenty of other things, but I really believe this serves God's people, and that's why we're doing this. And so after we came off of of the message conversation. I was talking to our staff prior to preaching the message, and I was talking about purpose. And one of our staff made the comment how every single morning he prays and he asked a question to God, and it really sparked the content for this. I said, "Oh, I'm writing a 3 Things podcast right now as we speak." I just spouted them off, and I'm like, I think before we get into understanding more of God's purpose for our life in the future episodes, I want us to unpack just 3 questions that I would encourage you to pray daily, or 3 prayers I would encourage you to pray daily, and it sparked right from them. That is so good. He said, I pray every morning and I ask God this question. Here's the first one: how can I serve you today? And I thought to myself, wait a second, I'm making an outline, I'm making a whole thing here. So how can I serve you today? And I thought about that. When you say, how can I serve God today? That's an easy question to ask. It's a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
Because you're like, he's God, he's above all things, over all things. He's omnipresent, omniscient, all powerful, all knowing, everywhere at all times. You're like, what good am I going to do God today?
It's also hard because it requires me to doubt self.
Yeah.
How can I serve you today? Not how can I serve me today?
Yep.
It
and
takes
so
the focus off
at the core of your purpose is to take you out of the equation, and not to say, God, what's my purpose? But God, what is your purpose, and how can I benefit, love you, serve you in that process? And so the idea here is, I don't know that you take a pen and paper and take 5 minutes and pray these 3 prayers. God, how can I serve you today? And then you may go, I don't know, but here's the thing you can do. God, help me see, and help me respond. Yeah. So here's 2 examples that I would say that happened, random opportunities of me serving God randomly that aren't planned, but I'm trying. And listen, there's time I probably miss it 8 out of 10. But Sunday, a few weeks back, I left church on a Sunday, was heading to eat with some people who were in town, and they had to get back somewhere. We had to get somewhere, and it was a tight window of time. But these are good people who love Jesus. It was more fun and entertainment, right? On the way to eat, there was a young lady who was stopped on the side of the road, and a child almost walked out in the road in front of me and Julie. And I just whipped off the side of the road. Julie said, "What are you doing?" I said, "We're stopping." Boom. In that moment, it was serving that lady, but it was being Jesus to that lady. It was serving God through that moment. Wow. It was a whirlwind. She was having a panic attack. There's various things that played themselves out that were beyond my expertise. The fire department came. We got her safe. Next thing we know, they brought her over to the restaurant. We bought her a meal that day. And I not trying to get glory for any of that. The point is those opportunities are there. Yeah. And so
can I just say, you saying that as Christians, our muscle memory is, I'll pray for you.
That's right.
Some things I feel like, and this is bold, but some things I just feel like we don't have to pray for.
No, that's right.
Like, sure, I can pray for you, and I probably should, but you know what? I can provide you a meal. I can provide you an act of service. Yeah. I can do something to serve you right here. Yep. Beyond just saying a prayer, which, let's just be honest, it's a fad. I'll pray for you, and then we walk away.
Well, we saw this even recently on the Monday night football game, or I think it was Monday night football game or Thursday night. Yeah, Monday night football game between Buffalo and Cincinnati recently. And player goes down. Yep. His heart stops. They call, the ambulance out, and they perform, CPR and get his heart started. And by, at the time of this recording, we're seeing progress in his life. What a miracle. But everybody's like, pray for it, pray for it, pray for it. And there was one host on TV that stopped and said, you know what? I'm going to pray now. I'm not going to say I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray. Yep. That's serving God even. And so I say, I have so many encounters even in the lobby here, or even, it's like, hey, Pastor Carl, will you pray for me? Rather than saying, yeah, I'll pray for you, stop and pray for them.
I can be honest and say that I have in the past been terrible at saying, I'll pray for you and not. So what I've begun doing is saying, I'm pausing to pray for you. And if I'm texting someone that, I am intentional to put my phone down. And it may be 15 seconds, it may be 25 seconds, but I want to pause in that moment and pray for that person. Because I know too many times in my life, if I'm just being honest, this is transparency. I say, I'll pray for you. And then I get caught up in life. I forget. If you know me, you know I'm easily distracted. Yeah. And so I'll forget. And
the crazy part about that is when I do that and I pause, stop on the side of the road, tip the server. Yep. Whatever it may be, God opens up more doors for me to serve him. Yep. Because he goes, now have the conversation. Now invite them to church. Now pray for them. Now, when they go, so, wow, thank you so much. I don't know. It's like, hey, listen, I just believe that God loves you. God has a plan for you. And maybe something that I've done today would just encourage you.
Yeah.
That's serving God.
Yep.
That's living out your purpose. See, if I can't do that to a lady on the side of the road, or a waitress in a restaurant, or a waiter in a restaurant, then how in the world should I stand up on a platform and preach to thousands of people?
Oh, for sure.
So here's something we started years ago. I don't do it anymore, because it was something we started to make the habit of serving God by serving others. Now, when I say serving others, I don't mean even Christians. I mean non-believers. This is serving God many times. In this question is, God, how can I serve you today? I'm thinking more along the lines of just out in society, in culture, in my everyday life. We'll get to the other conversation here in a minute. But one thing we started to do is we used to go to restaurants, and this is prior to having kids, or when my kids weren't at the right ages. And we do it now. We pray as a family before our meal. But we used to stop and say, hey, server, bringer, or say, we're about to pray over our meal. Is there anything going on in your life? We just believe in the power of prayer, and we believe God has a plan and purpose for you. Is there anything we can pray for you about? And it's funny because people will be like,
sure.
But if I frequent that restaurant, or
they come find you.
Or then I tip well on the back end, I've served God today. And you'll see that pattern. Jesus came not to be served, but to serve, and to what? Give. Give what? His life, everything. And so we used to do that. And there would be servers be like, and just stare at you. And then they'd come back and, true story, they would say, I thought of something you can pray for. And then I would say, do you want to pray with us, or do you want us to just pray for you? And we would pray with people. Now, it's something that we don't do that anymore. I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but the reason we did that was to create a habit of doing that. COVID hit, various things. We didn't go for a while. We haven't started the habit back. It's also a good model for your children of what it means to serve God wherever you're at. And so that's just some practical ways to start. I hope that you get to the point where you feel the nudging of the Holy Spirit to say, pray for your server. Ask your server that question. Or you get to the point where you just are more aware of God saying, there's where you can serve me today. But pray that prayer in the morning. Take 5 minutes and pray these 3 prayers. Here's the second one. God, how can I serve those closest to me today? So serve God, and I'm going to serve others. Serving God is serving others so many times. But like my wife and my kids, how am I going to serve them today? I am convinced this is the best marriage advice I could ever give anybody.
I'm all ears.
Yeah. So, Julie, how can I serve you today? And then serve her. I just thought that's funny because I was thinking about serve me divorce papers. That's not what I'm talking about, guys. So some of you listeners, it just made me think about this. If I'm praying and asking God, how can I serve today? Every day, 365 days a year. If I only bat 500, that's 180 plus days a year I'm serving my spouse, right?
Yeah.
So my kids. So it may be that every single day hey, your son, he's 11. He has a basketball game today and he's amped up and whatever. Won't you just take and go on a walk with him and talk about life? Like I'm certain, and just ask him. Not like this. It becomes intentional relationships, intentional time. Hey, why don't you, one of the things Julie said, I didn't know this until we go to counseling, and we've done this several times in our life, but we're really in learning about our temperaments now. And one of the things I heard was in counseling, I had no idea. She was like, sometimes I wish you would just notice the bed and make it up. And I was like,
oh, so you're one of those. You don't make the bed before you leave.
Bro, no, I don't make the bed. But I also,
that's your first thing. When you wake up, make the bed, and you've accomplished something for the day.
Well, it is if you're the one staying home for the day. But now, for example, we're on Sundays, we get out early. Other days of the week, the whole family gets out early. Man, every single time I see that bed needs to be made up. It's not to make up the bed to go, look at what I did, honey. It's to serve her.
Yeah.
Now, whether she sees it that way or not, it doesn't matter. It's me growing. That's my purpose as a husband is to serve my wife. Yes, to lead my family. Yes, to take care of my family. Yes, to lay down my life, but laying down my life means serving her. And so that's a good way. Here's the third one. How can I serve your people today? Wow. So how can I serve you today? How can I serve those closest to me today? How can I serve your people today? I would say, going back to your family, there's so many ways. Wives, there's no lady on this podcast. There are so many ways. Ask your husband, how can I serve you today? Husbands, ask your wives, how can I serve you today? Because I can speak from a man's perspective on how I would love for my wife to serve me. I can also tell you what I'm doing that my wife would go, but you ain't doing very good. So like,
Right.
but ask, have a conversation, have 10 minutes a week. Say, how have I served you this week and done well? How have you, and how could I better serve you?
Yeah.
And if you don't have a spouse that loves Jesus, then just serve away. Just serve them away. And I had this question. One of the questions when I put it out on social media was, what is the, how do I stay married to somebody who doesn't love Jesus, or how do I make my marriage work? I mean, that got infiltrated. Here's what I said: love your spouse like the person you wish they were. Wow. Serve your spouse like the person you wish they were. Because like, if you don't do it, then when they are that, you won't even know how to serve them.
Right. Wow.
And so like love them into the kingdom if at all possible. And so here's the third one. I said, how can I serve your people today? Just some basic ways. A text message. Hey, thinking of you, pray. I'm telling you, when I have a text Daniel, text this person, like stop and do it.
Yep.
Hey, God lays on my heart to pray for somebody. I texted somebody, I think the week before Christmas, God laid them on my heart. It was through another conversation that I'd had. Through another conversation, God laid them on my heart. I said, hey, buddy, just want you to know, love you. You're on my heart today. I'm praying for you. But I prayed for him before I sent that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so then the response back was like, man, I really needed this. I really want to say thank you for being my pastor. I don't know what they're going through, but that was serving God's people.
Right.
It was opening up opportunity for me to serve again in the future. A note of encouragement: be open. God may say, hey, on your way home, stop by the chicken place or Publix and get some chicken and just drop it off.
Place.
Just drop it off, Send a gift card. And here's one I would simply say: it all starts by serving in your church. Yeah. And that's the way we ended Sunday. But you listen, every week you don't serve in your church, serve God's people, because that's what David did. The enemy's robbed you a week of your purpose.
Wow. That's heavy.
Yeah. So like, can you take some time off, sabbaticals, rest? Yes. But a lifestyle of serving. Jesus came not to be served, but to serve. So I'm excited as we dig into some more practical. These are practical.
Yes.
Some more like long-term things about how God's purpose kind of interweaves into your life. We'll talk about in the coming weeks. Anything you want to add?
No, man, I think you covered it. It's very practical steps. These are questions I want to include in my prayer time in the morning.
Yeah.
And so even when we talked about that in staff meeting, it just really sparked some thoughts in my own life. And so I want to start doing this and see it, watch God move in my own life. And hopefully our listeners will take the challenge as well.
Yeah, and then when you get back to the end of your day, take 5 minutes and go, all right, I wrote down, God, what you told me to do today. How did I do on that?
Oh.
Or how did I not write down, but you showed me an opportunity? Take 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night, whatever it is. I think it'll be interesting to see if our staff does this, how we serve one another better.
Yeah.
So, hey, thanks for tuning in. We're going to continue this conversation about God's purpose for your life, fulfilling God's will, God's plan. We're going to look at some stories from the Old Testament, New Testament, and I'm going to share some fun stories from my life of kind of finding God's purpose along the way. So we'll see you next time. Like, share, let people know. If this is helpful to you, it's probably helpful to someone else, and we'll see you next time on the Good Life Podcast.